Welcome back to the Purple Political Breakdown. How's it going? How's your day been? We are back at it again. Today, we have a very interesting conversation that I do think will be very valuable. Of course, if you've been listening to my podcast, I'm sure you've heard a lot of the kind of current news breakdowns, but at times I do have guests come on to have very important conversations of political topics that will help either inform people or at the very least introduce them to a solution or a way of thinking that could be very valuable, especially considering how messed up the current political landscape is as of right now. In order to have that conversation, I have a great guest to talk with me about the value of human rights in political society. And I'm sure that we're going to have a lot of good back and forth in this conversation. But without further ado, here's my guest, Dr. William. How do I pronounce your last name?
Armaline.
Armaline. I'll be kind of just calling him Bill because that's a handful to talk, say the entire time. But welcome to the podcast, man.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me. I want to point out, are you in Ohio, by the way?
Yeah, I am in Ohio.
So I just got to point out, I rep my shirt today for you, bro.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm born and raised from Ohio.
I just moved here.
Oh,
I moved here a year ago actually, and so just is not the right term. My friend's an Ohio guy. His whole family lived in Ohio, Cincinnati, Ohio State fan, Bengals fan, all that stuff. So
yeah,
I'm just kind of adopting it.
Where are you at in Ohio, if you don't let me ask?
I'm in Liberty Township, like 20 minutes from Cincinnati.
Oh, bet I know exactly where you are. Yeah. I grew up in Columbus. My whole family's from like Youngstown, Cleveland. My wife's family's from Cleveland and Pittsburgh. You know what I'm saying? Just where I'm from. Where are you from originally?
I'm from Hawaii.
Oh, Hawaii. Oh, bet. Okay, bet. All right. Cool. Yeah. I was just curious. And I saw 860, which is on your phone, which is Connecticut.
So I lived in Connecticut for a long time.
I was in Hartford for 10 years too. So I was like, man, where's this dude at?
All over the place, man.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a good place over here. And Connecticut's solid, although it gets very cold. But one of these days I'll go back to Hawaii for sure. Great weather over there.
Yeah, that's why I'm staying in California, bro.
I don't blame you. I do not blame you at all. But to kind of start this conversation, can you introduce who you are, what you're about, also plug your book as well so the audience kind of figures out your general background?
Sure. So my name is Bill Armaline. I'm a professor in sociology at San Jose State University. I've been there for actually about 18 years. I've been teaching for a hot minute, and before that, I was at University of Connecticut for about 8 years, and I was like teaching and working on my PhD and all that kind of stuff. My background really is in education, human rights, and sociology. So I was a high school teacher. I ran a Boys and Girls Club and projects in Toledo for a little while. Then I went to graduate school and lived in Hartford, Connecticut for about 8 to 10 years. Trained real heavily in my sport out there for a long time and traveled the world for a bit for my sport. But while I was doing that, I was getting into my degree program. And for that, I really did a lot of studies of kids who were in the system. So for my master's degree, I did really hardcore research on youth who were wrapped up in homeless shelters, basically all over Connecticut and East Coast. Out in California, we have separate systems for delinquency and dependency systems. In the East Coast, at least at the time, that wasn't the case. It was all kind of mushed in together. So I was, working with and studying with youth that were caught up in those systems in Connecticut and other area systems, living in Hartford, going down there, working there for a while. And then I switched over and did my further research on kids in the actual youth prison in Hartford. So I don't know how familiar you are with Hartford, but, I lived right across the street from the train station right there downtown. And so like you go down Park Street, and that's the big, Puerto Rican barrio down Park Street. And then you go up the north end, and that's the big black neighborhood up there. So I was living like right on the edge of that, doing my research at the juvenile prison, which was just down the road. And so, I made my bones really in my research, studying in prisons and studying youth and adults in the system. But then did all kinds of other stuff too, got into human rights. I was one of the first graduate students for the Human Rights Institute at University of Connecticut, which is one of the prestigious institutes in the world. And then San Jose State wanted to hire me out here to create the same for SJSU. And so that's what I basically did over the last 15 plus years is I built a minor program out here for human rights and built the Human Rights Institute, which is now run by another gentleman who's wonderful. I'm at a point in my career I get to take a break, and I don't have to run it anymore. But so that was kind of what I did. In terms of scholarship and the book and all of that, I've been involved, along with several other scholars in the country and in the world, in developing what we call a critical sociology of human rights. That's just a real nerdy way of saying just sort of a left political view on human rights and how we can offer some advice on how to make some of this stuff work. But the history of my scholarship is really kind of as a black sheep in that field, right? So I've been one of the people since the very beginning saying like, hey, it doesn't really seem like this international system is working very well. It kind of seems to be unraveling, and we really need to pay attention to why that's the case. And I've been writing about that for some time. And then by the time we get to the third book, so this is the most recent book you were talking about, Human Rights Praxis and the Struggle for Survival. So this guy is our third book in a series where we've talked about what are the fundamental problems with human rights and international law in terms of like why we talk about them and they exist in theory, but they don't seem to exist in everyday life for people in our country and other countries around the world. So we're trying to talk about like why is that the case? But with this most recent book, I got to say it's much more dire, and the thesis is much more heavy. So in this most recent book, what we're having to grapple with is not just our inability to achieve fundamental human rights or fundamental human dignities in the world, but our ability to survive as a species at all. And so what we're talking about now, frankly, is what it means to struggle against what we're calling overlapping threats to human survival, which can basically be summarized as devastating forms of conflict, nuclear or not, and climate change. And that these two threats overlap in such a way that not only threaten sort of our ability to achieve, fundamental human dignities, ways of life, but life at all, to avoid, collapse of civilization as we know it. Not to be kind of like doom and gloom, but that is really what we're up against. And this is why so many of us, not just on the left, but just many of us that are intellectuals and whose job it is to pay attention to this stuff, are some mixture of furious and terrified at the current political realities and current, at least U.S. administration.
It's very interesting. One thing that I've said continuously on my podcast and in general when I kind of discuss politics is that I call myself like I coined the term nuance centrist because I feel like I can kind of contextualize and understand things based off a value system that I personally created without being kind of bent over from the left or the right and being kind of captured into one ideology over the other. And I'm not saying necessarily, well, I'll put a pin in that with certain things that are happening in our country. But ultimately, one thing that I have always said about the left, even though I criticize them here and there for certain things, is that they genuinely seem like they care about the individual and the person based off certain things that they try to advocate for. And human rights is one of them for sure. And it should be it when you hear the word human rights, like you would assume that people understand that kind of concept and really kind of can kind of empathize, sympathize to it, considering that it's like you said, there are certain things that are fundamental. But even if you kind of just take a step back and look at it, like this is something that I want all the people I care about to have for themselves. Can you break down for an individual who's listening, trying to understand the value of human rights? Can you break down what is human rights and what are the fundamental human rights?
Super easy, bro. I'm really glad you asked, because I really think this is some of the basic education that Americans need. So the first thing that's very interesting about our current political climate is you would have our owning and ruling classes talking about human rights and international law as if we weren't the one that created the damn thing. We literally made the whole thing, and we made it in our image for our domination of other people's. So this whole conversation in the United States jumps off from a point of complete and sheer ignorance. And what we have to admit is like Whether you like them or not, they exist because we put them there. Period. And not just us, lots of other people working with us. And Americans are frankly deeply ignorant of many things, but this history being among them. And so, how did that work? What are our rights and where do they come from? And I would invite anyone to look at them and see if you actually disagree with a single one. I'm going to bet you don't. I'm going to bet that you're going to be like you and say, yeah, these are things that I should have and everyone I love should have. And so, what are they? We think of these human rights in like different sort of categories of rights, and they actually come from different historical trajectories. So, the first group of rights is called our civil and political rights. Think about these as the rights that draw the lines between rulers and the ruled, between those that govern and those who are under their governance, right? And these are all of the rights that were established literally by our revolution and the other revolutions. So the English Revolution, American Revolution, and French Revolution in that order. And the documents that came from those revolutions out of the Enlightenment period, which would include the French droits de l'homme, like the French Bill of Rights, basically, and our Bill of Rights. So if you look at our human rights, they're very, very close for a very good reason to the Bill of Rights that we have, right? So freedom of speech, due process, freedom of self-incrimination, right? All of these kinds of things, right, are also articulated as human rights because they're literally taken directly from our revolution and our revolutionary documents. Like, again, literally. The second group of rights is social and economic rights. Now, these rights are established under a different revolutionary period in the world that was, influenced by thinkers like Marx and Engels, but also labor movements in the United States and in the West. These are the same movements that gave us probably the one thing that working people, where you and I are, well, where many of us are from, enjoy every day, like the 8-hour day, the weekend, overtime pay, the things that we take for granted, but actually are pretty much some of the last rights we have left, all come from the struggles of that period that last about from the late 1800s, which was literally just celebrated this week on May Day, right? 1886, the struggle for the 8-hour day, all the way through the sort of early 20th century, right? And these are the socialist thinkers, the communist thinkers, and these sorts of things. And so our social and economic rights are rights to things: a right to housing, a right to healthcare, a right to a job, and not just any job, but it's actually your human right to have a right to a job that pays you a living wage, et cetera, et cetera. Again, I think Americans would be really surprised to know what their international human rights actually are. And they would have very different kinds of expectations for their rulers had they been aware of those rights, right? But these are their human rights as well, right? But American owning and ruling classes deride those rights because they don't want to provide those things, as this current administration is making abundantly clear, right? We have a third body of rights, but it's only a couple rights. And these come actually from the post-colonial, anti-colonial wars, including indigenous populations like those in Hawaii, right? But these come from these kinds of post-colonial, anti-colonial struggles. And these are what give the right to self-determination. So there are some cultural rights. So, for example, one's right to religious and cultural practices within their nation, their community, or what have you. But also the right to self-determination. In other words, the right for a people and a nation to be recognized as a sovereign nation as such. All of these together, those three groupings of rights, political and civil, social and economic, and our cultural rights, those are all of our international human rights as articulated through the IBHR.
I feel like a lot of people can get behind all of these different things. Of course, one thing can, conjure up in terms of debates and conflict in terms of what qualifies which, what qualifies a proper cultural right, what qualifies a certain type of self-determination, how much is a livable living wage, stuff like that. That can kind of get in the weeds, and I know people will constantly get in the weeds, but as a establishing foundation, I feel like these are pretty strong from what I'm seeing, of course, to at the very least work from. Everything has its nuance, but sometimes I know it's hard for different political sides to agree on. But if this is where we start from, we can kind of get to a lot of places. Now, if you don't agree to these, then I mean, there will be no bridging of the gap, and then we can kind of talk about kind of conceptual ways on why certain things should not be provided to others. So with that said, you said that these are like international human rights, which is a very interesting term that you brought up, because I am curious from your point of view if there's a difference between like this overarching international human rights versus kind of more individualized domestic rights per country. Like America obviously is a Western country, and its Western values provide a lot of benefits to the people here, whether they agree to it or not. And that's very different from countries in like the Eastern Europe or Asia or the African countries, of course, African countries. Yeah. So, do you treat them the same based off where they're from, or all across the board, everyone should have the same type of rights?
Well, I guess I'll speak to how it's handled at the international level. So the way that international law works is that each country is periodically reviewed. It's literally called Universal Periodic Review, the UPR process, under which so everyone that is party to. So the way that human rights work is basically through treaty law, right? You sign and ratify treaties, and those treaties say, "Hey, I've agreed to these rights. I've agreed to these rules of the road." Right? Sign and ratify them, and they become the law of the land, just like any other treaty. And you can look that up in our own constitution. It's constitutional law, right? We sign it, we ratify it, it's law of the land. And so that's the way international law works, right? But there's no UN army that comes in and right and enforces international law. So the question becomes, how does international law then work? How do you make sure people are doing, like you said, the things that they're signing up to do? Whereas we do, and I will agree with you that there are some of those things that the US and the West does well, and there's some things the US and the West does horrifically wrong. I could also point out some things that China does really well and some things that China does horrifically wrong, right? And so, how do we know this? How do we go about doing this as an international community? So, this is done through the UPR process. That Human Rights Council that Trump is so adamant about screwing over and getting us out of and defunding, that's actually the group of 47 countries that periodically review everyone for their obligations. And it's a very open process, and the United States has been through multiple reviews on these and other rights, like the Convention Against Torture and stuff like this. So basically, what happens is that committee reviews sort of how that country did over the past 4 years, does a report, and they will also ask folks like me and even folks like you or whoever, like they will ask what's called society reports. So people inside of that country to also report on the human rights sort of behavior standards in that country, because we don't trust governments to tell the truth all the time, right? As we should know, right? So you do all that to kind of like check the government with their own people. Then, so they put out their initial report. The country gets to put out a rebuttal. Well, not a rebuttal. It's really more of a response to say, here's where we agree, here's where we disagree. And then that Human Rights Committee puts out a final report on how that country is doing according to international obligations. And the notion is that the sort of pressure and force of diplomatic forces and the force of sort of like sunshine as an antiseptic pushes countries to do the right thing. And now I absolutely have my criticisms of that system that I can share, but that is how it's supposed to work, right? And so to sort of again answer your questions from a substantive perspective, look, the United States, in some ways, does some of these rights relatively well, at least up until the last 5 years. For example, we did press freedoms and freedom of speech pretty well, with some historical exceptions. I'm not sure we can say we're doing that anymore. For a long time, we took seriously certain red lines when it comes to warfare and also when it comes to due process and things of this sort. We've since eviscerated that as a country. And frankly, we did that long before October 7th. We did that long before what's been happening here. And the reality is, as I wrote about in my second book in 2015, and many others talked about too, when Obama made the decision to start, literally assassinating US citizens in foreign sovereign countries where there is no declared war zone, including a U.S. minor, again, like that eviscerates all of international law. And not just all of international law, but even all of the legal concepts of due process that go all the way back to the Magna Carta of the 1200s, right? So, you know, the United States position relative to international law and human rights has been as one of its like literal founders and originators, but now we have also become one of its greatest sort of undermining forces, and that is kind of the paradox and the hypocrisy that our work really gets into in detail.
I am very interested in kind of diving into the United States. One, I live here. But also I do think the at the end of the day, the world kind of runs not through the United States, but very much attached to the United States being the most influential, most powerful country in the world. So there's a lot of important conversation to have with what the US is doing, especially now. It's always hard because I hear Obama brought up quite a bit. I was way too young to understand anything politics wise back when Obama was president. So I do have a more kind of positive mindset when it comes to Obama, especially when I compare it to the presidents after Obama. So
Hey,
regardless of that.
oh, look, I you've got to remember, my job does not allow me to pick friends in the ruling class. So you're gonna find that I am, my job is to unflinchingly look at these things, and I wish I had more positive things to say about our past several administrations when it comes to preserving human rights and international law, but unfortunately, I don't. There isn't a lot positive to say there, if we're going to be honest. And that's why you see folks like Jeffrey Sachs and others who are, top level global diplomats kind of mask off saying this in some pretty brutal and embarrassing ways for US administrations on the world stage as we speak, because it's been decades of this. And now, of course, now we got to pay the piper, and everyone's like pretending like you don't know why we're in this position. Well, we know exactly why we're in this position. And relative to what you said earlier, like, I don't know how much that's the case anymore, bro. I mean, our position as global hegemon is done.
I will say a lot.
It's done, bro.
A lot has not been going well, but I mean, a lot can turn, especially with this current administration. We'll kind of address that, but
Yeah,
ultimately, when it comes down to it, I only can kind of speak. Obviously, I try to touch upon the history as I can, but everybody's busy. I touch upon a little bit of Israel-Palestine history, for example, a little bit Ukraine-Russia, of course, and trying to understand certain aspects of it, but when I usually I'm gonna have to talk about the Trump and Biden administration more so, especially because when I started eventually guiding
sure,
into
sure,
politics
sure.
and becoming more mature. And this is not really kind of to kind of come at you for the reason why I'm kind of framing things like that right now is based on my current understanding. I know that there's a lot of things that require context. That context back in the day, if I was younger, maybe I might have been able to understand that context. Nowadays, there's a lot of context to a lot of things. A lot of things, even with context, does not excuse certain actions, and I'm sure we can talk about a few of them. Um, but ultimately, it's never easy being a very strong superpower and kind of also kind of steering people in certain directions. And of course, the United States in particular have done some bad things, done some good things, and the way when I talk about like the prosperity of humanity and their ability to kind of have these certain rights, I always kind of try to phrase it like this, especially when I'm talking to someone on the left, is I feel like when you were talking about the future and trying to evolve humanity into another landscape, it's always important to constantly strive for the future, always important to always get better. That's fine. But where I'm always like kind of pushing back a little bit is, but we'll never reach that perfection. We'll never reach that utopia. I think at this point, unless you're religious, that perfection doesn't exist. So, as someone who kind of looks at human rights and then you kind of explain the process of how it kind of works, where someone is supposed to be somewhat unbiased, but able to look at everything that is going on and judge it. I've seen some human rights index. I've seen the United States not do very well recently. I think I've talked about it in the podcast episode But at the same time, how can you ensure when you're kind of diagnosing everything that you're looking at, you are not framing it in comparison of a utopian kind of mindset on how things should be, or how certain things you want them to be, versus how they reasonably could be or will be based off the context of current human society? How do you ensure that you don't have that level of bias?
Yeah,
If
I
that
mean,
made sense to you, just let me know.
well, no, there's a whole body of left work. It's called utopianism, right? And that is meant to imagine alternatives to the very real dystopia that we are in right now and headed toward full steam ahead. And so and to be honest with you, I don't know. I mean, we're experiencing things now that would have been laughed out of rooms if they would have been described as dystopic novels 10 years ago. So, I mean, I don't know, man. I don't think our danger is a left utopia or left utopianism right now. I think that's the furthest thing that you need to worry about, because you literally have right wingers like putting their dystopia in place as we speak. So I don't think, I mean, I'd love to sit here and say, man, we're talking so much about left utopia. I don't see that anywhere. I don't see any discussions of left utopianism
Oh,
anywhere.
I want to preface things by saying this.
So what I mean to say is, like, so my work is really based on us trying to survive. I wish we were at the point where we could start talking about utopianist kinds of things. At this point, frankly, I'm trying to I'm trying to push us to the point we might see another century. So you know what I mean? Like I understand what you're saying. I guess what I'm saying is, like, what I see are very real owning class oligarchs making the rest of us subject to their dystopic fantasies without any ability to have voice or push or anything. So, I mean, if we want to talk about utopianism, let's talk about Peter Thiel's crazy ass. Let's talk about Elon Musk's crazy, psychotic ass, and the extent to which we've all now become pawns, what, in their little bitch ass midlife crises. Let's be honest about what's happening here. And so we're gonna talk about left utopia. Like, I'm sorry, brother. Like that's just not. I mean, that's where we are, right? Like so
I
when
do
you hear
want
a
to
leftist, like,
establish.
yeah, go
I
ahead.
do want to establish this so we're both on the
Yeah,
same page.
yeah, yeah,
As someone who believes that I properly critique both sides,
yeah, yeah.
I hate the MAGA administration, like, with a passion. So I'm like there with you.
Mm,
I do think a lot of things they do is extremely wrong, and I talk about it constantly on my podcast on
yeah,
so many bad things on Donald Trump. Based off current conversation with the Trump administration and everything about the fraudulent election, since we've hit that period, I mean, like, I haven't been talking about certain things that I don't like with certain kind of utopian kind of leftist kind of conversations, for
yeah.
sure. I only brought it up in the context of this conversation
Yeah, yeah.
because,
No, I know exactly what you're saying. I'm not beefing with you at all. I just want your
oh, for
audience
sure.
to understand. That's all I'm saying. It's like my work is not left utopianism. That my work is literally pointing out, like, this is kind of like how we're headed in a direction where not only are these human rights that are, again, like we just said before, like real basic stuff, like, can you get a job? Can you go to the doctor and get better if you get sick? Is there going to be any form of social security or retirement for you when you are old? Right? Like basic shit, bro. Like basic level stuff. That's all I'm talking about. Those are gone, man. Like those are literally evaporating before our eyes. The old head of Social Security just came out just last week and said, if we don't do something right now, Social Security is done. You realize 40% of 40% of our seniors depend on Social Security to survive? It will
Yeah,
be a human nightmare if these dipshits break that system for their profit. And that's exactly what it is. Musk and all these assholes, they want that $2 trillion fund in their casino. Just like they wanted your retirement in their casino, and that's why you don't get pensions anymore. They're forcing everybody to play in their casino. That's why they don't want to pull all everybody's gullible ass into crypto. It's just another way to grift you again and again and again. And again, like if you listen to any of us that actually do this for a living, we're screaming this from the rooftops, but we are not the grifters. I am not Alex Jones. I am not trying to sell you a fantasy. So we don't get those clicks, but they do. And they are winning that competition, and we are all paying the price for it, right? So it's like, I guess what I mean to say is like, what we are not in a position where we can even really think about utopian kinds of things. The reality of our world as working people right now is the few things that we have left as protections and benefits in our lives are being taken from us right before our eyes. And you can chalk that up to whatever you want, left to right or whatever, but what I just said is objectively true. And again, you don't have to take my word for it. Go look up the speech from the old head of Social Security yourself right now. He's not a lefty. This is not some crazy radical. He literally says, if we don't do something right now, this is broken, this is done. That will be a disaster for American society. And that's just one little example, right?
I'm glad we're on the same page on how much we don't like what the MAGA administration has been doing. Because we are 100% on the same page on everything about that. With that said, I think it was important to kind of establish I think you realize that there is that level of people who have that kind of leftist utopian type of mindset. But based on what you're saying and based off your point of view, you're really focused on kind of a reasonable way on people in society to get the rights that they deserve, which I do think should be part of the conversation. And as unfortunate it is to say, like you would hope that most people would understand that just because someone has the qualifier left doesn't mean that they want the craziest type of things. And that's why when these conversations are being had, it's important we kind of resonate to these people, make them really understand. So let's do that a bit. So a lot of things have been going on when it comes to the MAGA administration. My guy Bill here really wants people to understand that there are certain rights that you have that are being sacrificed right now for the greedy power of let's call him what he is, somewhat of an authoritarian. I call him a full-on authoritarian personally. So I guess we can kind of start. I think you mentioned healthcare, and I do think that's a very interesting place to start. When it comes to healthcare, I know there's been a lot of conversation with Donald Trump saying he has concepts of a plan and how they might consider potentially slashing Medicaid and Medicare as well. When you're talking to someone and explaining the importance of healthcare to them as a right, and then talk about what the Trump administration is doing is not in your best interest, how would you explain that to them?
I would first say that the leading cause of bankruptcy in the United States is a medical emergency. And it's also one of the largest areas of absolute theft and fraud in this country is privatized healthcare. Just straight up, like objectively, that is a undeniable fact on the numbers, on the dollars. We as a public have been fleeced for generations by these private industries and by politicians on both sides of the aisle who are greased to the lips by those industries, including big pharma, insurance, private health care. I mean, right. And everybody knows Luigi. Everybody knows the deal, right? Like Americans are not game goofy to this. But the owning class is very good at escaping their own blame for those problems. And so what do? They deride the programs that would otherwise save you. So just like they're doing with Social Security right now, right? They're trying to break it and then badmouth it so that people will go along with getting rid of the money they've already paid for, the program they've already paid for and earned. It's the same thing with private health care. Whenever we start talking about Medicare for all or universal health care, all of those interests line up, and they line up. All their lobbyists, all their consultants, they flood the airwaves with all their talking heads to beat people over the head in the United States over the ideas the only way to get good health care is if these other idiots get rich doing it. that the private industry is the only thing that deliver. The rest of the world does not do it that way. We are the only ones left in all of the advanced and industrialized world that allows single little groups of tyrants to exploit the fact that all human beings get sick and all human beings die and must also give birth to be born. These are not things that should be subject to profit and exploitation. You should be able, if you get sick, to go and get better as a member of our society. If you, and we have the right wing talking all this, they want all this natalism, right? They want people to give birth. They're going to give you a what, $5,000 check? I want audience members to, tell me how quick you're going to go through that $5,000, y'all. You're going to go through that $5,000 on the ride to the hospital to give that birth. That won't even cut that if you have to take an ambulance. So again, it has become an absolutely infantile conversation that is actually, frankly, should not be complicated at all. Should be infantile. We are the last ones doing it wrong. And the only reason we continue to do it wrong is because there's enough of the grifters in administrations who are on the take that prevent us from doing it another way. And again, when we line it up to try and do it, all you got to do is pay attention to the interests that come out on the other side. It's the same as housing issues. Look at the interests that come out on the other side when you try and solve it. So again, I would just ask people of this country, ask yourself a question. What, is everyone else in the world idiots? You and we are just so much smarter than everybody. We just know how to do it, and they're just all doing it their way. What? Because they're dumb. And the other thing too is the American people aren't game goofy to the rest of the world anymore. Frankly, the biggest gift to China has been a U.S. ability to now see Chinese life on a daily basis. Get sick in China, break your leg in China, see what happens. You're not going to charge a thing. And you get top healthcare, which, by the way, the same would happen even Turkey. And look at all of the people in the United States that are literally medical tourists that literally will go to other countries for this reason. And again, we said, well, they ask Canadians if they want our healthcare. They don't. Ask the British if they want our healthcare system. They don't. They openly laugh at us. In the same way they openly laugh at us about our university system that should also be free. This is Americans are I think in a period right now where they are waking up to our point in history and to our lives relative to others in the world. And I think that is something that your owners and rulers are terrified of, and they're trying everything they can to prevent that from happening.
So when it comes to the conversation of healthcare, very much in line. One of my kind of top 5 issues is how flawed our healthcare system really is. Cool. With that said, the solution, a lot of people from the left, and the one that you brought up, is universal healthcare. So I'm gonna ask a 2-part question.
Sure.
First question is, when it comes to universal healthcare, can you provide, obviously you already kind of provided reasons why it would be good, but you can kind of bullet point summarize that once more, but also provide the counter argument why people don't think we should have universal healthcare in America, to see kind of that kind of duality, because I do think it's important to kind of understand that. So people, and this is the reason why I do this, is so when people hear the solution and then they hear the kind of detracting reasons why it's not good,
I
they are not, so they're not kind of throwing a back like, oh wait, what? So provide that. And then the second part of the question is that how would you recommend it get implemented into American society? How do you think the people who are listening, what do they have to do to ensure that something like this starts getting implemented? So 2-part question, like I said.
Sure. Well, I'm going to ask the second part first, because that's the easier part. Because literally Jayapal and Sanders and others, and I want to point out right now, I don't think this is a party issue. I think the other thing that's happening, and by the way, I don't necessarily agree with the whole realignment argument and all that. I have my own kind of like, views on that. It's a very online theory, like many theories. But there is some truth to the fact that there is not clear cut kind of separation with the GOP and Democrats, and particularly in the working class, on many of these kinds of issues. And this is why you're seeing, for example, so many GOP and independents showing up at some of these Bernie rallies and stuff like that, just like they did back in 2016, right? Because he's speaking to some of these issues, right? They're like working people, Republicans or Democrats, know how messed up our healthcare system is. They know how expensive it is, and they know that it's not been good for them, right? Like you don't have to convince, I don't think, many people of that. So the good news is that there's a bill right now that was just reintroduced by Sanders and Jayapal and others, the Medicare for All bill. And so for people that want to support this idea, you need to get in, you need to get online, and you need to research this bill, and you need to support it, or something of its like in your state, or you can call your Congress member, you can contact that congressman and say, hey, I demand you take this serious. I want Medicare for all. I want universal health care. I want to not be, subject to bankruptcy because I get a cancer diagnosis or whatever. And so it's really easy in terms of what you can do to support it, and their efforts in state by state to push for this. And like I said, it was just reintroduced in the House, and you can jump on board right now. And by the way, these are being backed by some of the best workers in the country, some of our most heroic workers from COVID, our nurses unions, our teachers are really supportive of this stuff. And I want to make a pitch for it as well in a way that a lot of workers, I think, may not understand, but I think we need to appreciate.
Okay.
Not having universal health care has actually been one of the biggest problems in negotiating higher pay and salary from workers for generations. Do you know why that is?
Nope.
Let's say that you're part of a union negotiating with an auto company, right? So the UAW, right? And they're in those negotiations over their new working contract. The way it works right now is a ton of that negotiation goes into benefits because the employer has to provide those benefits. So rather than you negotiating for higher pay and all of those other kinds of things, you have to take time to negotiate your employer paying for your health benefits, in which they can say, well, we can't pay you more and we can't do these other things because we got to pay for these really expensive benefits. And why are they so expensive? Because there's grift all through the system. There's inefficiencies and grift and graft all the way through all of the system. It's wildly inefficient in that way. So imagine that's off the table entirely. The employer doesn't have to pay for it anymore. And they also can't hide behind it as an excuse in your negotiations for a better working contract. And you don't have to take my word for it. Ask any union organizer, and they will be the first to tell you this. This has been a problem for our union organizing for, again, all working people. I don't care what your party is, bro. Everybody. This has been a problem. And if we get universal health care, that gets yanked out of the conversation, and that inevitably benefits working people. And it benefits the employers too, frankly, because imagine right now you're a smaller level employer. One of the reasons that it becomes very difficult to scale up as an employer, as a small business, is because you've got to cover all those benefits. If that's covered under Medicare, that's not your responsibility anymore as a small business person. Not only do you not have to deal with all of that, but you then can be certain that your workers are going to be okay and they can show up to work and their kids can show up to school because they have health care, right? So it's like, I guess what I'm trying to say is there's all kinds of reasons why other societies have chosen to do what is frankly the obvious right thing here. But we don't have these conversations as Americans because we don't run the conversations, right? Those are run for us by private media and all these other forces. And you know who's running the show there. Tell me how many pharmaceutical ads I'm going to see if I watch any hour of CNN.
I don't know, maybe one every 15 minutes.
So again, whose media is that? So again, the fact that we're not having an honest conversation on US news media about healthcare should not be a surprise, right? So and the fact that the rest of the owning class doesn't want you to off a healthcare executive in the middle of broad daylight on the street is also should not be a very much surprise to people politically, right? So I guess that's my answer to the second part of your question is there's all kinds of reasons that we should think about this stuff, and there's all kinds of ways for you to support it right now. To cover
Okay.
the common question that you wanted me to cover, and it's a very good one. What's the argument against typically? The arguments against are usually two that I'm familiar with, that I hear most often. The first is it'll be shittier healthcare. It's
Right.
not true. I mean, it's just simply not true. And whether you want to talk about lines and waiting, I mean, how many stories do we have of our current healthcare system of people waiting for years to get coverage cleared by insurance companies, to be buried in years of paperwork for a procedure or after procedure, any of that? I find those conversations about delivery of care to be completely separated from reality. Because again, if you ask people in other countries that use this kind of a system, or you even ask seniors in our country who use Medicare, they will tell you they would not trade it. They will be the first to say, no, we would not trade you. Not on your life. So I don't really understand that argument. I don't know what are the procedures in Canada or in Europe or in Turkey or in China that people aren't getting. You simply do not have those stories other than from those who are searching for them on their hands and knees to find those exceptions. The second argument is cost. The study's been done over and over and over and over again, even with analysis from the Congressional Budget Office, because as you may know, anytime you put a bill on the floor like that that passes through committee, the CBO puts out a report on its budget effect. Switching to Medicare for all or another form of universal health care, because that's just one way to do it, there's multiple ways to do it, has been shown over and over and over again to be a cost savings, particularly over time. If you put it out over time, the cost savings is huge. But again, to understand that, you have to understand how inefficient our current system is. I mean, just think about what I said earlier. How much money is being spent by pharmaceutical companies to advertise directly to consumers, which should be illegal anyway, by the way. That goes away in universal healthcare. All of it. But what it means is people can't get rich as pharmaceutical drug dealers anymore doing work that frankly doesn't benefit anybody. It means you can't get rich being a healthcare executive denying people coverage for a living. And yeah, those people have to find something else to do. I won't be losing very much sleep or shedding too many tears over that. But that's the reality. I mean, those are the two arguments is you'll get crappier care. I'd love to see the evidence of that from anywhere in the world. And number two, we can't pay for it. Every study that's happened so far with the bills that are going up in front of the House have demonstrated cost savings. So I'm not sure, those are the arguments. I have not seen any convincing evidence to support them.
Yeah, from my understanding, those would be the counter arguments as well. When it comes down to the first one, when you kind of described the potentiality of, worse care, whether it's like waiting a little bit longer. I mean, I think you articulated perfectly sound. At the end of the day, you got to kind of look back. Is it worth it still? And the answer is yes. Regardless, if that actually happens, the longer waits. I mean, just think about yourself. Think about your friends and family. How much of them, instead of get hurt or get sick and go like, no, don't take me to the hospital because I don't want to pay all those costs.
Yeah,
Now you
man.
go from that to being able to, okay, now getting the care you need that you weren't going to get regardless because it's too expensive. It just kind of works itself out.
Well, and all the other ways that it affects our health and our health decisions, right? Like as a sociologist, I really appreciate the way you put that because it's really sharp. Like Think about the ways that Americans make these decisions now, where they're like, they won't get the preventative care. They won't go get the checkup. They won't go get the thing because they can't afford it, or they don't want to bother with it. They don't want to bother with the paperwork, all the other things. And so what does that mean? So then they're waiting till they're more sick. Right? And that's worse for them, worse for the system, worse for our costs. And then in worst case scenario, they're going to an emergency room. Well, guess who pays for that? Taxpayers.
Right.
Like, we pay for that. Like, you're paying for it anyway. You see what I'm saying? But not like in a cheap way that would have made a healthy society and made it so they can live a good life and all that kind of stuff. You're doing it so it has to become an emergency first. And now we're in a crisis, right? Because now you've got a real health crisis. Those are expensive. You see what I'm saying? It's like on so many levels, it's just unintelligent social design. And I think this, honestly, is the other thing Americans are really going to have to wake up to. And this is what's so interesting to me about the and this is classic in falling empires, both in proto-fascism, but also in falling empires. There's always this romanticism of a past that never existed in a way that it never existed, because it makes you kind of feel like you, I don't know, are going to go toward it. And it's just funny, right? Because you have all of this new obsession with like the family and traditional gender roles, and they want traditional race roles too, by the way, but that's another conversation. Biology kind of shit. They're way into that.
Yeah.
Natalism, having kids, we want to compete in these ways. Elon Musk, we need more population, all that. Well, you know what you got to do if you want all that? You got to have healthcare and you got to have education.
No, I'm with you with that. With what you're saying there.
We're doing the opposite. So I don't know.
Another thing that you said, and I do think this is important to address, because one of the things that I'm going to say it as it is, MAGA likes to do, is they kind of throw out something out there that is easy to attach to for the kind of voter base, to say, you know what? Yeah, this is going to ruin me because, and I'm becoming very black-pilled about this term personally. I hate the term taxpayer. I'm becoming very black-pilled on that term because it's used so much. Oh, my taxes. I'm like, bro, I'm not trying to hear all that. But with that said, people really care about the idea that their tax-paying dollars is getting put into these programs. They love that talking point. So when someone does bring up the point of your taxes are going to increase if we have universal health care, what would you say to that? Because I know you said, like, is there evidence? But a lot of these people don't really care about whether or not there's evidence.
Well, if you don't care about evidence at all, then I'm frankly not interested in talking to you. I mean, what are we doing? You're a child. I mean, I'm sorry. Like, we got to start having frank conversations with one another as adults in our society, and I'm done with talking to man boys and girls.
I hear you.
I'm done with that. So you want to say to me, you want to have a conversation, but you don't care about evidence, then go have a conversation with 7-year-olds and leave the real decisions to adults. Shut the fuck up and get out of the way. Not to you, but I'm just saying, like, in general.
No,
if that's your shtick, then you're the reason we're in the position we're in as a nation, and you should not be making any decisions for anyone.
Well, I want to be very clear. I don't think they have evidence, but they bring up talking points and narratives as their evidence. So
and that's what I mean. That we as a society have got to be done with dumb guy culture. Like, this has got to be over, right? So I'll be one of the first to say it on a podcast. So all that stuff, it's got to go. It's not serving us, and we like children cannot be in charge of things anymore. So again, like, the world, it deals in evidence. So to come back, because you had an actual question for you for so ranting about that. What were you? I'm sorry. What were you asking?
Yeah. I mean, I completely understand your points at the end of the day when it comes to, like, these type of conversations. But these individuals do exist, and they have loud voices for some reason. Okay. I remember. And then their voters, they're the ones who vote for certain ways.
No,
these people want to hear
a great answer.
Okay, why should I care about this if my taxes are going to get increased?
Well, it's for that exact reason, right? So what I would say is this: shouldn't you expect something in return for your taxes? If I go to other countries, there's all kinds of things I'm getting in return for my taxes. And let's see if I get those things here. You ready?
Right.
A free and quality public education that is all the way through university. Do I get that in the United States? No, I do not. Uh, any form of reliable health care, regardless of how much money I have. Do I get that in the United States thanks to my taxes? No, I do not. Do I get access to housing? Do I get a promise that if I work a full-time job, 40 hours a week, that I will have a sustainable place to live that is not burdened with roaches, rats? No, I do not. I do not get that in the United States. I can keep going. In the United States, for a return for my taxes, do I get a reliable and safe and efficient public transportation system like I would get again anywhere else in the industrialized world? And I invite our listeners to look up the transportation systems all over Europe, even Eastern Europe, all over Asia, even in the developing parts of Asia. And it puts our country to absolute shame. I mean, no question. So, name something that I get in return to my tax dollars in the United States, besides a military that I'm not sure if it serves me either, frankly, and police that, depending on the color of my skin and how much money I have, may or may not be protecting my interests. I don't know. You see what I'm saying? So I understand if you're saying here, what am I getting for my taxes? Yeah, you should be saying that. What are you getting for your taxes? And so what people like me are saying, we should be getting something back for what we are paying. We are paying more in tax and in private for healthcare than anywhere else in the world. I agree. We should be, for the money that you're paying, you should be upset. You should be getting all of those things in return for the taxes that you're paying. But you want to know why you're not? Because we allow a very small owning class to siphon out all of the value that we all create together every day, every week, every month, every year. And that's why you have a class of oligarchs while you have, I mean, literally, I live in Silicon Valley. And I'm very involved in local politics here where I have to suffer this obvious hypocrisy, where the wealthiest people on the planet every day drive their Teslas by the biggest homeless encampments in the country. That is what your tax dollars are getting. And so, yeah, like I agree, you should be getting something different for what you pay. And maybe listen to some of us about what some of those things can and should be. And because the direction of the right wing is to say, let's destroy everything that we get from our tax dollars and only leave the things that serve our owners and rulers and that coerce the rest of the world. That's not going to go very well for most people in the country, bro. And frankly, those military forces aren't what they used to be. It's not going to go well. And China is going to clean our clock in that race if we don't get smart very quickly.
Definitely need to innovate in that kind of sector. Ultimately, I do think that's a very good rebuttal to that, and hopefully that helps people understand the value of the proposal where we're kind of insinuating. I mean, he's right. People complain about taxes quite a bit, but this is tangible. You know, taxes can come out to like Social Security and Medicare, but imagine if that was just universal care that you can actually benefit from. That just seems more ideal for people who complain about that getting taken out of their taxes in the first place. So I'm there with you when it comes to a lot of that stuff where you're saying regarding the healthcare. Um, we probably disagree in terms of the value of the military, but I'm a little black pilled and thinking, not black pilled. I'm probably, a different term is I still retain the idea, especially because I live in here. And I mean, of course, I care more about the country I'm living in, that the United States should have the strongest military. But I also think that China is catching up more than people think. So there's a lot of conversation to go there. But I do want to touch in two more topics because this is such a overarching big conversation and we don't want to take forever. But
Yeah,
two
sure.
more topics I do think are very important to address. One more domestic topic and then one international topic. The domestic topic, you mentioned it, and that's education. And I do think that's a very important conversation. That's
Yeah.
another thing that I care a lot about. I think public education is very inefficient. However, current conversations in terms of education, I do think is becoming very problematic. Obviously, stuff I've talked about this on my podcast quite a bit with what Donald Trump is doing, trying to pressure certain universities and certain type of people who are trying to protest, and certain things he's doing with his ICE agents is not okay. But another aspect about it, which I'm also very curious to hear your thoughts on, is how MAGA is making it their mission to really push private schools and charter schools to people over public school. And even though I think public schooling is very inefficient, I think that is a terrible idea. So I'm very curious to hear your thoughts about both.
So look, there's been research on this for decades, and it is completely uncontroversial to say among those who actually do this for a living. Remember what I said earlier? That the goal of the owning class in the United States. Well, let me back up. It's been the goal of our owning and ruling classes to unravel the gains of the New Deal and of the civil rights movement since they happened. Like, just the fact. It's been happening. It's been an ongoing effort. And now they're celebrating success. Now, how have they been able to do that? And I'm going to remind us, let's just do a little bit of basic shit, right? If public school was so bad, public schooling, so it's so bad, it was so broken, how do we get to the moon? When were we the most powerful as an empire, the most powerful force to ever see the planet Earth? You want to know what our education system was then? Besides it being segregated and fucked up in that way, purely public. We did what empires do when they build: invest in educating an educated public so that they can be the innovators and the engineers of the technologies of the future. That's what we did.
That's a good point.
That's how we got to the moon. That's how we were an empire. All that. Was that done through charter schools? Was that done bribing some capitalist that they might be able to get rich along the way of doing it for us? Because that's what you're talking about when you talk about privatizing something. You call it what it is. Right? So the whole conversation is asinine. I mean, the whole conversation is completely ahistorical and backward. But let's even just set that aside. So what has actually happened in public education? The exact same thing that I described in the post office. It's been a plan of again, right-wingers, religious zealots who've never been happy about them not being part of school curriculum as well. They're part of this too.
Yeah.
Right? All these dipshits have gotten their fingers in the pie. And they're all grifts. They're all profit schemes. Like all privatization is always a profit scheme. Always, every time. And I will go to the rack on that, right? I'll do with anyone that wants to go, right? Because the evidence is abundantly clear. Whether you want to talk about the post office, Social Security, retirement benefits, public education, it's the same. And all you have to do is look up the players. Look up the DeVos family, who's not only tied in a private military contracting all over the world through her dipshit brother-in-law, but the DeVos family's made gangbusters of money and political clout privatizing education and selling charter schools all over the country. So, this is, again, people need to wake up to the cons around them. And I guess this is, I want to kind of, there's an overarching point that I've been thinking about for this interview today, because I was thinking about, Youngstown and Ohio and all that kind of stuff. And I got to say, one of the most disappointing things of the whole Trump era is to see how many people and how many kinds of places like Youngstown, where I grew up, become bootlickers. I mean, you grew up in Youngstown. The one thing you learn growing up there, it's a mob town. You feel me? The one thing you grow up understanding in Youngstown is you do not trust rich people. And back in the day, that included white people. You didn't trust the WASPs, you didn't trust the rich, and you didn't trust the cops, period, for any reason ever. And then in 2016, you got Trump going down there rallying his ass off. And it just makes me wonder, like, what has happened to so many people in our working class? And I know the answer. They've been beaten down by a lot of stuff, but fucking A, man. To see you licking the boots of a billionaire con man, thinking that he's got anything for you, or that gives two shits about anybody on earth, let alone you, is so shocking and disappointing and so utterly flies in the face of everything I grew up with in a working class place. And it is, I mean, that's what I want to ask people when I'm being confronted with some of these arguments is like, how can you even talk with all that leather in your mouth? Like, do you even hear what you're saying? You're sitting here arguing with other working people that this billionaire has your back. Where are you from? Where did you learn this? I mean, again, it is unbelievable to me that this is where we are culturally. But again, I mean, we are. Here's where we are. So I don't know, man.
Yeah.
Uh,
Hey man, I'm completely with you. I have a lot of issues. I always have to kind of calm myself, like, hey, as they say in the religious spheres, they know not what they do, man. They know not what they do.
well, they do and they don't. Yeah, we'll see. But yeah, the education thing, I just ask people. It's like, and I think this is the other piece of it, fam. Is like, I think we've also been taught we can't ask for things, right? It's just like it would not take that much resource redistribution to build and reinvest in an absolutely top tier, globally right admirable educational system, just like it is completely within our grasp to shift and start taking seriously building light speed or high speed rail like other countries have, these kinds of things. But it means that we got to make decisions. We got to know what's possible, and we have to be willing to take those resources back from those that have squandered it. And that's really what it's about. And those are the folks that hold all the mics, and those are the folks that are leading these cultish kind of political followings. And I just ask people to, like, man, just stop for a second, ask yourself some of those basic questions. It's like, yeah, but it is quite an interesting time.
Yeah,
That's what I'll say.
Mag has done a very good job in kind of creating a kind of mindset shift when it comes to education. They basically tell these individuals that uh, one, all your taxes will go back to you because now you can just use that money to send them to a school of your choosing, and that school will have religion in it. So many states are trying to, include religion into schools, and that school won't be teaching the LGBTQ and the woke ideology, and that school will also be doing
They'll also
better.
have shitty math scores and shitty history scores. And look, I mean, this is what I'm trying to say is like the data is out on all these grifters. The schools are not good. Like I'm not like, this is not my
No,
question.
I'm 100% with you.
It's with
Matter of
the
fact,
argument. It's just like this stuff is so tired. It is so old. It is so recycled. You know what I mean? And it's just like we can do so much better. So much better. Yeah.
like I said, I'm 100% with you. I did a whole podcast episode breaking down that Democratic states clear in terms of education compared to Republican states. It's actually not close. Republican states are the reason why our education scores are so down. It's not hard to look up. I even gave them links. So I'm there with you. It's just trying to, it's kind of crazy because I've been a public education critic in terms of I think it can be more efficient. Not that it should be abolished or anything. That's weird.
Yeah.
But now I'm at the point where it's like, now I got to defend public education. Tell we should not move ourselves to privatize education. So if you had a elevator pitch to talk to this person, that the ones that we're describing right now, and go like, this is why public education is so valuable to people like you, what's your best way to make them understand?
I think, again, I would say two things. First, I would again call up history and say, when have we been strongest as a nation? And what are the things that contributed to that strength, to that innovation, to our ability to like genuinely win the space race and like this kind of stuff? Like that
Right.
is a real test. Like that's a genuine empirical test of an approach in a system. And you can even look at other countries now. We could ask the really hard question again, like, how has China done what they've been able to do? Well, one thing that they did was invest really, 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 really heavily in education, and not just like broad education, but industrial education, so that they can develop those technologies and those workers can work with those technologies. Look at those classrooms right now where, I mean, whatever, I have huge, huge criticisms of AI, but in those classrooms, those Chinese students are already working with those technologies from a very, very young age and very, very highly, again, resourced, supported. And again, they also don't beat up their own institutions. How are we going to be a strong country when half of the country beats up its own public educational system, its own teachers? And this is where people need to wake up. This is where Charles Barkley, in that video that he did, went viral, and why he was so on point with this. And what did he say in that viral video he did a couple months ago? What he said was, our rulers have become very good at making us hate each other for things that aren't either one of our faults.
That's a
Basically.
bar.
And so think about this. Like, what does it mean if half of your political class is deriding our own public educational system? And again, not with solutions, in order to break and replace it with their own little grift. Right? Like, we should be questioning that. That's a form of, I mean, in my view, like, that's traitorous. Like, that's being a traitor. What does it mean when you are actively undermining Elon Musk, our postal service, our veterans, VA, our Social Security, all these things? That's traitorous. You are literally turning on and fundamentally breaking, skewering what all of us pay into and create for our collective well-being. There's a reason you have an educational system in a society. That any functional society that seeks to last beyond a single generation has to have a way to reproduce and raise a new generation. And that also includes education. That includes passing down of knowledge, these sorts of things. That has to be standardized on some level. That has to be guaranteed on some level. And not just guaranteed to everyone universally in terms of who has access, but what kind of education is that going to be? And I'm sorry, fam, we cannot say that the homeschooling movement and the charter schooling movement and all this stuff and the you can go ahead and be smart on your own has gone well for us as a people. Are we seriously going to say that we are not a deeply ignorant people as a result of those horrible choices? And now we're paying the piper. But we're not going to get better by going even further down that crazy ass path. We have to admit that that's folly. And that's the grift of con artists who seek to privatize our system. You know what I mean? And there's nothing more to it. Like, I mean, that's just really what it is. And there are plenty of problems in public education, but a lot of those problems have been self-imposed by politicians in an owning class that wanted to wreck it. We could very easily decide to not do that. I mean, the same is true of Social Security. There's one thing we have to do to make Social Security not just okay, but we could even pay better benefits, pay more to people. All you'd have to do is lift the cap. The only thing you'd have to do is lift the cap on taxing people over $350,000. So in other words, rich people would pay a little bit of money that they would never even notice. That's the only thing that would have to change for us to sustain Social Security in far generationally into the future.
Oh man, the conversation with the 1%. It's crazy how we kind of moved away from that conversation. That should have been the conversation, but we kind of moved
It
away
still
from
is
that.
for many of us.
It is, but nobody. We got MAGA kind of mucking everything up. Like, all right, now we got to focus on what they're doing.
Because it's a con, bro. And again, this is what's so pathetic. And it's what's so pathetic about watching the Joe Rogans and all of the manosphere dipshits that are just cannot stop worshiping wealth and the people that you know what I mean, making us all live through their insecurities together, but it's like, bro, these aren't our friends. They don't care about you. Elon Musk is not trying to be your buddy. He's not right. He's not. Zuckerberg is not just like you and doesn't want to be. Like this is the stuff
I
that we
hear
want.
you. I'm 100% with you on a lot of that. Again, another one of my top five issues is the 1%, the super uber elite. Last topic, because this is a very very good conversation. We might have to kind of do this again for sure. Is instead of focusing on a particular thing happening internationally, I'm going to kind of broaden the question and focus on the United States' role in dealing with international affairs. We know as of right now, there's two big conflicts that a lot of people are talking about, potentially a third, India and Pakistan not messing with each other right now. But we have Israel, Palestine, that's a big one. Ukraine, Russia, that's a big one. And as of right now, there's a lot of conversation on what USA's role should be in those two conflicts, as well with other things where the MAGA administration wants to cut certain funding internationally, i.e., U.S. aid,
Yeah,
to stop benefiting a lot of these locales all across the world. So,
yeah.
in your opinion, when it comes to the conversation of human rights, what is the United States, or what should be the United States' role to the rest of the world?
So on these points, I'm in agreement again with folks like Jeffrey Sachs, folks like Trita Parsi at the Quincy Institute, and others, that the United States has repeatedly passed up gigantic opportunities to do incredible things for our role in the world that would have endless payoffs economically, trade, war and peace, in terms of being able to ratchet down the tensions and the spending on military, all of these kinds of things. And let me run some of those down. Ukraine was a huge mistake. Should have been ended before it started. And I'm completely on board with Jeffrey Sachs on this one. I don't see how there's another argument that even before the Russian invasion, this could have been dealt with. And it's because of our aggressive position towards Russia, an aggressive position vis-a-vis NATO, that we passed up all those opportunities for peace. There was opportunity after opportunity after opportunity that was passed up, which, by the way, listeners should know is a very serious pattern in American foreign policy. So, for example, do you know how many times the Taliban actually offered to give up bin Laden? Several. You know what I mean? Like we have made decisions over and over and over and over and over and over again to avoid peace, to ensure war. And I can give you many examples. So Ukraine is another. That was a proxy war from the jump. And we could have avoided it entirely, and it should have been. And millions of lives would have been saved. And all of and geopolitically, look at what's happened as a result, right? Russia came out just fine. It's proven American sanctions are basically useless at this point. It's pushed them closer to China and Iran and others, which I don't necessarily care about. But if you're a hardcore realpolitik American foreign policy guy, you would, right? It's been an absolute disaster for the West as a decision. So again, missed opportunity. We could have been heralded by the world as diplomats and peacekeepers and being the adults in the room, but instead we refused. And now we're paying the price. Israel, could not be easier. Couldn't possibly have been an easier decision. And this is also why the Democrats are basically worthless and continue to be basically worthless politically, and why they basically have very little constituency at this point as well, especially on the left. At any point prior to October 7th, I mean, forget about October 7th, because again, prior to October 7th, Israel is still a nightmare of oppression, violence, apartheid, and all the rest, right? And so at any point along the line, Any U.S. administration could have dialed up that administration and say, it's over tomorrow. You stop all this nonsense, or you don't get another dime, you don't get another piece of protection, and it would end that instant. That is not the case. And our leaders of both parties have thrown their lot in with AIPAC and the Israeli intelligence firms, and who are all deeply integrated in our tech firms now, and all of these sorts of things. And now it is very difficult to disentangle the owning and ruling classes of our two countries in terms of influence, politics, weddedness to our militaries, and all of the rest. And that is a very, very terrifying and concerning situation. But again, what is it? A giant missed opportunity. We would be heroes to the world standing up to Israel, stopping that genocide, ending Israeli apartheid. Do you know what that would do in terms of our geopolitical goals in the Middle East? Do you know what that would open up for us diplomatically, instead of, just bombing another one of their countries back in the fucking Stone Age? These were all terrible foreign policy decisions that we are now paying the price for. And by the way, it's the reason we're losing the game to China. As we spent trillions of dollars pursuing completely pointless warfare that got us absolutely nowhere, when we had all of these other opportunities to make peace, and through making peace, make ourselves far more powerful and well-liked in the world, we wasted it all on that. So that military contractors and people who are part of that system of warfare, including the world's owning class, that deeply sort of invests in the war machines, right? They're the ones that profited from that. China took all that money through that time and invested in their own country, their own people. And so now we have a crumbling society and a quote unquote powerful military that still somehow can't win any wars. Weird. They've got a full society with schools that work. Remember all those things I talked about before? They can name things they're getting for their taxes. What can we name? Nothing. Nothing. Right? Those are decisions. We could have made other decisions. But this is the problem, right? Lefties are only listened to after. Like, this is a real good conversation for us to have now. Right? But no one's going to be visiting me with the oh, thanks, you were right all along. Right? We're not invited on to CNN. Right? The Democrats don't want us to be their consultants because they just learned that class war is a thing. So then we do it all over again. And then we'll say all over again, hey, we kind of told you this. We kind of told you that we shouldn't be doing this. You know what I mean? So yeah, man, there's all kinds of decisions we could have made, could be making differently. And not only would they be slightly different in outcome, they would be massively different in outcome. We would literally be a totally different country domestically and in the world. But we refuse, right? Let's just keep doing the same dumb shit over and over and over again, and let the same people and the same interest groups make the decisions over and over and over again. And then the predictable things will continue to happen. I mean, if we go to war with Iran, forget it. Whatever was left of this empire, it's done. Done. Right? If we get pulled into conflict with China, oh, God help the world. I mean, God help everyone. And you just mentioned India and Pakistan. There's other conflicts amidst, right, that we could be playing a role to help diffuse. But we're saying, no, we're not forces for peace anymore. We're only a force for war now. We're only going to do war now. But right, I mean, literally cutting all the State Department, cutting all of our diplomats, cutting everybody out of the UN, cutting all of our domestic service, cutting all of our domestic agencies, but injecting another 13% into military spending. He wants to spend $1 trillion on the military.
Yeah.
And a military that still can't win wars. I want to point that out. Your real powerful, big macho military that everyone wants to pump their chest up about, that can't win wars against countries in the developing world. How's that working out? I'm sorry, man. I don't understand these decisions. I don't understand very little logic in them.
So for me, when it comes down to it, I am more black pilled with the current administration and how they handle things, of course, because we got an individual who kind of leads through his ego, and that's very problematic. But when it comes down to a lot of these situations, when I usually talk about international conflicts from my kind of understanding, I only can understand so much. Obviously, a lot of these are very nuanced. Is that ultimately there's someone on the other side of the aisle that has probably just as big of an ego, and you would hope that it can be as simple as certain decisions, but I just don't believe that's the case oftentimes, unfortunately, as it is. um when it comes down to it, it's shaky to deal with people like Russia and China and Iran, with those individuals also having very big evil egos. And you can say for certainty when it comes to Russia and China that now we're kind of tweening into the authoritarian type of MAGA administration. We still have certain institutions in place trying to keep them at bay. Russia and China, I mean, they're full on authoritarian regimes at this point. Um, so those ones, I mean, if you don't abide by the individuals, how's the conversation really going to go? The reason why I bring that up is I do think it's always hard for me to guess on an easy solution when dealing with difficult people like we have right now in our current administration. Easy solutions just don't exist when those people are a part of the conversation. But there's no denying that the United States has done things that are against their own best interests. But I also do think at times that they are trying to be too kind of too diplomatic is not the word. Like when it comes to with Israel, they want to stay with Israel's friend, but also realizing that they're doing bad thing, but they really care about being aligned with Israel. And like there could be a greater good conversation, but that tie, that political relationship is very much intertwined. And it's another kind of foundational institutional principle that, hey man, we're allies, we have this brokered peace, you scratch my back, I scratch yours. And then we have egos on Israel's side as well as egos on America's side. That's like, yeah, we're gonna kind of stay connected. The ultimately my thing is I do believe that the United States should be strong, but help me understand in your point of view, do you think that the United States should be have a heavier hand in decisions that they make, or do you believe that the way they're going about it right now is, yeah, actually kind of talk me through this
No,
because I'm trying to
I
understand that.
understand. I have a response to your question. So I think, so this is what I get into in the book. So and I really appreciate your previous question because it allows me to sort of illustrate this. There's another way for us to conduct ourselves in the world. And frankly, our entire species survival will depend on it. That if we stay, frankly, whether you like it or not, it does not matter. It doesn't ask your opinion of this, right? Whether we like it or not, if we stay on our current trajectory, civilization doesn't make it through. We will either blow each other off the planet or cook ourselves off the planet over the course of the next century on the current path we're on. It does not matter what you think about it. It does not matter what politics you have. It does not matter what you would like it to be. That is a fact. Like straight up. As factual as it is that gravity makes my thumb. Like we literally understand that inevitability with climate change to the extent that we understand gravity. That much certainty. We are closer right now. If you look at the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists and their doomsday clock, we are closer right now to a nuclear apocalypse than ever before in human history, including even the Cuban Missile Crisis and the first test of the first thermonuclear weapon
Mm-hmm.
today. And you mentioned one of the reasons. One of the reasons is this tension between India and Pakistan. But another reason is, and nuclear armed Israel, etc. Right? All of these. So there are. This is kind of what we're up against. And I guess what I mean to say is that we have other options in how to conduct ourselves in the world, and to do maybe not even global leadership, but global participation, to actually like take seriously being part of a global community where we're gonna, I don't know, maybe do things people want us to do. Maybe, I don't know, let's get crazy. Let's think about cooperating with somebody. I know that's wild, right? Like maybe taking seriously a cooperative position toward China. Saying, "Hey, why don't we tackle climate change together? Hey, why don't we save our societies having to spend all of our value on creating a whole new generation of nuclear weapons to point at each other? Why don't we do that? Hey, Israel, sorry, we're not going to keep arming you anymore. We're not going to fund a genocide. Go figure. That's going to be a red line for us. Genocide will be a red line. And what will that do for us diplomatically, trade, politics, right? Endless opportunity, bro.
So
Endless
based
opportunity.
on based on what you're telling me,
You could have
I do think.
imagine partnering with China to build light speed rail in the United States.
I mean, I understand what you're
Why
saying,
aren't we doing
and
that?
I have another part of the question, which I'm very curious on your answer, because I think the idea of United States taking a stronger stance to prevent conflict is very reasonable. Now, obviously, a lot of when it comes to the nitty gritty on certain people's egos, well, the Israel Palestine kind of history is very complicated from both sides,
No, it's not.
but I mean, we're gonna have to agree to disagree on that one.
We can
I,
agree to disagree there, but I am 100% Brooks' theory on that. It is a simple relation. It is not a complicated one.
Oh, fair enough. We'll put a pin in that one. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, the United States having a role to kind of prevent conflict, especially understanding the potential, escalation that can happen, as you mentioned with like nuclear conflict, it should be on the forefront of a lot of people's vision, of course. With this current administration, I don't know, it's very dicey, but that is very reasonable when we reach the point where we tried these preventative methods and they didn't work, and then we have a force that is antagonistic to certain principles America holds. For example, you know, all the human rights we talk about. I mean, that's the simplest way to put it. Like, there are certain locations in the Middle East where they treat women like crap and they get no rights. And then there's, places like Russia where they control their freedom of press and freedom of news and freedom of speech and stuff like that. Same with China. When you have like these locations that are not really willing to accept your preventative solution, and and then you talk about the idea of kind of dealing with them, how do you approach dealing with these entities for cooperation when there's such a visceral difference in basically how you conduct certain like core rights and core principles of how they run their country?
Yeah, I would say a couple things. I mean, first, I don't think you. I mean, you got to get your own house in order before you're telling other people what to do. So, we I think again need to also wake up to that we have been barking at other people for a long time, and China is kind of trying to sell this point to us right now, being like, "Hey, why don't you mind yourself who you're talking to right now? We're not your little child anymore, right? By the way, why don't you take care of your own problems at home before you start talking to us about ours?" And like I just said, I don't think we're doing too well along any of those lines you just mentioned. How are we treating women right now in our society? How are we treating children right now in our society? How are we treating the poor right now in our society? How are we treat? I don't think we have room to criticize anybody on any of those things right now at all. So I mean, I can, because it's my job too. I'm a scholar on international human rights, so I have to call balls and strikes for everybody. But as an individual, as an adult in the world, my job first is to be responsible for where my tax dollars go and where I have place and power, and that's in the United States. And it's my job to hold my rulers and my owning class right to hold their feet to the fire on the behalf of myself, but also on behalf of other people in the world, like Palestinians, like Ukrainians, like, you know what I mean? Because they can't do that. Only we can do that. That's our job to do. So that's number one. So number one is, frankly, I don't know that we are in a position to be telling other people what to do. And we need to be probably focusing on whether or not we hold those commitments ourselves first. Second, I think we also have to understand that we are in relationship with these countries, whether we like it or not, right? We're not going to unwind globalization. That's not going to happen, right? You can't unring that bell. I mean, people are trying to pretend as if that's the case, but to some extent, our fates are connected, right? Whether it's the supply chain and trade, whether it's global issues like climate change or whatever, we're connected whether we like it or not. So the question becomes, how do you want those relations to be? Do you want them to be antagonistic, right? Or do you want them to be cooperative? In my view, everyday people of both countries have every bit of interest in a peaceful cooperation between those great powers. But our owning and ruling classes, some of them, don't see that. Now, one of the things that I talk about in the books, I don't want to get too far away from the book stuff, is I talk about what's called the transnational owning class. So part of this is a little bit of mirage. That in actuality, the owning and ruling classes all across the world are all across invested in the same things. That they don't really, that the geopolitical competition between nation states isn't all that it used to be, right? That they aren't actually in that kind of head-to-head competition anymore, because the owning class is now global. They're not beholden to a single nation state. I mean, think about our oligarchs right now. Half of them are South African. All of them have passports and properties all over the world. They do not care. Like if this country goes to just utter shit, their life does not change. They don't, and that's what I'm trying to remind people, like, they aren't you. That's an act. That's little theater they do on your podcast to relate to you. And so you think that they're a human being. But they ain't you, bro. So again, like, this is kind of the terms of power now, right? Is like they get to navigate geopolitical conflict, but they're not beholden to it like the populations of those countries are. They just navigate it. The Chinese are just as invested in the global military police state as we are. In fact, one of the things I talk about in the book that's very interesting, right? As soon as all of this decoupling and like head-to-head kind of military competition stuff started to be talked about a couple of years ago, it was like during the Ukraine buildup, like 2021, 2022. One of the most interesting things was members of like our military industrial complex, so the heads of these big military firms, came out and said, fuck are you talking about? No, you're not. You're not going to decouple a thing. Where do you think half our stuff is made? Right? So how's that going to work? So we have a weapons industry where we are making weapons, but part of the supply chain for our own weapons is with your enemy. How's that going to work? So even some of that is theater. Even some of that is not even real. And the weapons industry is literally telling you that, being like, no, what do you mean decouple? It's a global industry. It's not what we think it is. It's not the simple little risk board, like board game that we all think it is. The game is way different now. And this is also where I'm getting in arguments with other folks on the left too. Like, this is a problem on the left too, where people are stuck in these old ways of thinking about power in the world, where it's like, so there's one kind of part of the left that is kind of addicted to this old Western imperialism stuff, where it's like, all of the bad stuff is just basically the West and the white West and the United States and imperialism and taking advantage of all of the other countries and populations of color and things like that. That's also inaccurate. That it isn't just the West anymore. That again, it's a truly transnational owning class, and the West does not run the show anymore. The BRICS countries now have a larger market globally than NATO countries. They have outpaced us now. They have outsized us now. And they are just as much involved in brutal colonialism, brutal military violence, all this kind of stuff. Look who's involved in Sudan and DRC. It's China pulling those minerals out of the DRC, right? It's the UAE involved in backing those military groups slaughtering children. Those are BRICS members and US military allies. It's a complicated world, y'all. This is not a world anymore with like you got the good guys and the white hats and the bad guys. No, 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 no. You got a transnational owning class, and they're all in on the game. And that game is based in colonization, extraction, violence, insecurity, war. And they're all profiting from that. The Chinese, the French, the Americans. Why do we know that? They're all cross-invested. My work, William Robinson's work, other folks' work demonstrates that on the data. They all own the same things. They all have their money planted in the same places. So it's a more one of the things my book does is demonstrate that we are not living in the world that a lot of analysts are still attempting to describe. It's not that anymore. You have a global owning class. They are very much players on the block, right? And it's a multipolar world now. You don't just have a single Western hegemon dominating everybody. It isn't. So it makes it a very interesting, it's an interesting terrain, I guess I would say.
Yeah. I like how you kind of put that, kind of even coined the term of like having like these transnational group of elites. And I do think that's very important to consider when it comes to these conversations. And I'm glad you kind of outlined that it's more than, the very, very elite Western people. Because I do think you can kind of turn off a lot of people going like, oh, yeah, these people are just anti-America. They're probably just communists, socialists, Marxists, all that stuff. And then
that's like JD Vance calling China a country of peasants, bro. It's like, fam, where have you been? I mean, that's probably one of the most, like ignorant. I mean, just like straight ignorant. I don't mean like that as like pejorative. I just mean like objectively describing it as an ignorant statement of the world. Like it like would see like, have you been in a cave, bro?
Oh yeah,
wild. Like
the right rhetoric is definitely very opposite, thinking that China is like the worst of the worst, in the sense that they can't even compete with America, and that's just not true, especially nowadays. With that said, I really liked how you kind of coined that, because ultimately you got to take a step back and realize how a lot of these elites are very powerful, and they have a lot of influence in a lot of different areas. To kind of take a step back a little bit from that point, you mentioned that the United States, to certain things that they can do, the first thing you talked about is how you kind of put it is that they should not be as critical to certain locations, considering certain defaults they have. There's a term that people use relating to religion about throwing the first stone in a glass house or something like that.
Exactly. Those who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones.
Yeah. So when I heard you say that, initially I was like, I feel like there's 100% certain things that the United States can, in comparison to others, they're much worse in. But when you kind of look at it, I think there's something to really garner from that, in the sense that instead of coming at certain conversations with a level of kind of superiority and believing that your way is the highway, it is better to really understand that your faults exist too, to kind of resonate with the other side. I mean, the right is supposed to do it, considering they're religious. A lot of them are Christian. That's a very embedded Christian philosophy. And knowing that you're not perfect, you are someone with sin. Yeah. So you should be able to kind of connect with the other individual. And I do think that
it allows you to come forward humbly and to create solidarity with other people. You know what I mean? It's like,
for sure.
I mean, I'm just think of it as like you would think of like just everyday people. Like, would you like if someone just came straight up to you, just bitching, you know what I mean? Like, didn't earn your respect at all, just start telling you what to do. Like, nobody likes that. Like, you got to respect somebody first. You got to be like, oh, okay, I see you. I see how you do things. Like, you're a respectful person. Now I'm more apt to maybe listen to what you have to say and like do all those kinds of things. Like, I think beyond politics and international relations. I think it's just like common humanity. You know what I mean? Like,
for 100%. Just imagine a situation where you're walking down the street, just chilling, and then Elon Musk shows up right in front of you, says, "Yo, you're dressed like crap and your hygiene smells. You better do better." You're not gonna like that as an insult. You're like, "Damn, I'm not gonna listen to this piece of garbage." So it's very humanistic if you can really resonate with that idea. So I do think that's very interesting to consider ultimately, when it comes to certain kind of communications with other countries who do things vastly different. A lot of things I very much disapprove of, but how you engage in the conversation should be done in a humble way to really resonate with them.
And really asking, like, what can we offer the world? Like, really, like, thinking about shifting our whole approach, not seeking power through domination, but through partnership and through, proof of work, and these kinds of things, like demonstrating what can be accomplished, demonstrating good faith, demonstrating, loyalty, these sorts of things. But instead, what are we seeing? We're seeing lies, we're seeing manipulation, we're seeing ripping people off, threatening them with more wars, pushing military forces onto their borders. Like, these kinds of things is just, there is, like, literally another way to do it. There just is. And I think it's a way that we can, even on like an everyday interpersonal level, kind of understand. I mean, just think about that right now. Who wants to be our friend in the world right now?
Well, right now, basically nobody, but
We've given the finger to everybody, our friends, our everybody. It's just like, where do you think that's going to go?
yeah. This conversation is very apt based off the current landscape where it's basically where America do what we say, and that is not a very effective strategy ultimately. Although I believe that one core principle of the United States hopefully still has moving forward, we'll see in the next 4 years, that I do think will trump basically most societies, maybe all societies, is the ability to criticize their own government, the ability to kind of say what we want. That's why I'm saying I hope it's this way in the next 4 years. You know what I'm saying? I
Well,
never
I
know
mean,
with
people in
things.
my discipline are lawyering up right now because we're being told you're not going to be able. I mean, we're already being scared out. Like,
Yeah.
they're coming after our students. So
When
it's,
it comes to my talking points about the United States, I always have to separate it with this current administration, considering all this stuff that they're doing recently. But before the MAG administration, I think that principle is very valuable.
I mean, look,
Um,
I will say I agree with you. It's obviously, I feel it's very valuable, and I will say I also, because I mean, I don't want to. So this is, I think, another misnomer of those of us that identify left, right? Is like, our deep, deep, deep love and appreciation for the American people is for almost everybody that I know that is on the left. I mean, look, there's crazies everywhere, right? I mean, there are idiots for whom their politics become their identity, and that becomes crazy everywhere. That happens all the time, and the internet is a machine to create that insanity.
yeah.
But I said, what I think often gets lost is many folks who are on the left have the positions they have because of a deep love for our people, because we want to see people be okay. We want to see people be able to go to the doctor. We want to see people go to school, to have a baby, to live a life, to retire, to spend that retirement with their grandkids, to do the things that everybody on earth should be able to do, right, as part of a functional society, right? That's where a lot of our passion and our politics is coming from. And so,
And
it's
it's very reasonable because
yeah,
at the end of the day, when you think about it, the biggest critics are the people who live in that space. So ultimately, you're supposed to have the biggest critics of America
yeah.
live in America. That's how it should be.
And we want to hold ourselves to the highest standard, right?
Yeah.
We want to, you know what I'm saying? And that's why, like, and look, and that's why I was answering your questions earlier the way that I was. Like, look, my position on public education isn't because, like, I have some cultish dedication to some, I don't know, socialist educational program or Maoism or something like that. It's, I'm looking very empirically at what has best served our people as a nation, as individuals and communities, and all of that. And when I see our history in the data, and I see other societies and their data and all of that evidence, to me, it's just abundantly clear, right? It's just like a robust, well-funded, well-supported public educational system has gigantic benefits for families, for individuals, for neighborhoods and communities, for those places. But again, you have to invest in it, you have to take it seriously, and you can't at the same time, at the other side of your mouth, beat it up and try and destroy it so your friends can privatize it. Like, you have to actually be all in on the thing, right? It's I would say the same thing about public transportation. I would say the same thing about others, but I think we on the left have a lot of work to do as well in this kind of messaging and talking to people about like these politics aren't what Americans have been told they are, right? They're pretty reasonable kinds of positions that are really based in a genuine care and concern for my fellow American, for the people that I share my neighborhood with, my school with, my community with, no matter what they claim politically, no matter what party they're in, no matter what age they are. You know what I mean? Like, the way I was raised in Youngstown, right? Is like, you look out for each other, you care about each other, and you know who you trust and who you don't. That's to me, that's very American. Like the way I grew up is very much 100% American culture. But there's a vested interest in convincing people that it isn't. That somehow, I don't know, our only culture now is being in for yourself and fuck everybody else, and it's wealth or nothing. I mean, I even ask this to people now, like especially the religious folks that you were talking about, because I think they're a little bit more tuned into this aspect of what sociologically we call anomie. So it's a concept from Durkheim that describes a state of normalness, a state of being lost in choice, no direction, right? No purpose.
Right.
Isn't that us as a country? What's
Yeah,
our
a lot
what's
of
our
people
national
trying to find.
purpose? What's our larger purpose as a nation? We've just become a bunch of individual strivers.
Yeah.
Everybody get rich and fuck everybody else. Well, that's not going to build a very good society. You don't have to be a genius to know that if that's the basis of your society is doomed. And I think I just described the basis of our society. And I'm perfectly willing to be wrong. Somebody tell me what the national project is.
Well, I feel like that is an interesting way and
We don't have
very
one.
reasonable way to kind of describe the current state of things. I mean, the initial idea was obviously having this kind of free country. The American dream, I've said this before, is low key dying a little bit. So I think that's a fair way to say it, where everybody's kind of in for themselves. Nobody else should be having this. I think that's fair to say. Currently, I think that's fair to say.
You've got a whole generation of asset holders, homeowners that will not budge an inch on their property values so that the new generations can own a home. They don't give a fuck. You pay your rent, bro. They're literally saying your whole generation, like Gen Z, has been told, yeah, home ownership is never happening to you unless you win the lottery. Best of luck to you.
Yeah.
I mean, is that a society that can last more than a couple of generations? No, it can't. That's all for me, me, and screw everybody else. Those societies go under, bro. Whether they're right wing or it doesn't make any difference. If that's the basis of your society, it will not be a society for very long. And history has proven that. So again, like I just ask people, it's like, if you think it's not that broken, tell me then what's our collective purpose? Why are we all? What do we all? If indeed we have a nation, what is the basis of our nationality? What is our purpose?
Hey, we might find the answers that you're asking in the
We
next
better
4
hope. We better
years.
hope to. We better
This,
hope to, bro, or it's going to be a lot more nightmares, but we'll see.
I think these next 4 years will perfectly embody the future of America. As it's extreme that may people sound, I don't think it's extreme. I think this current Trump administration will be a litmus test of America's survivability moving forward.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of real interesting energy in the country right now. Like I'm certainly not a like, oh, everything's doomed or anything like that. I'm brutally honest about things. Like I don't think, because I don't think I'm not someone who thinks it's very helpful to just blow smoke up everybody's ass. You know what I mean? It's like literally my job to just be kind of like unflinchingly clear, right? It's
Yeah.
like no matter what that means, no matter how uncomfortable it makes people, like that's literally my job is to do and say those things. But that doesn't mean that like me individually, I have like no hope or anything like that. In fact, quite the opposite. That as a teacher, I get to work with young adults, and actually, we teach students of all ages. So my students are across the board. I have like traditional age students, but I have much older students as well. They're like veterans, cops, like veteran military folks, everybody. And we all have a real good time, talking about these issues, and that's actually what gives me hope, right? Is that because I see their energy and their sense, and they're making sense of these things, with a little help, but getting it. And I see, the numbers of some of the rallies that are starting to show up now too. I'm starting to see both right and left wing, folks coming down, shouting down their Congress members, really demonstrating like, hey, we care about these things. Like, we're not going to let you break everything, that is, for those of us that care about those democratic processes and preserving some of this stuff, that's real hopeful. But we're going to have to do a lot more. And, going back to something you said earlier that I think was really important, that I hope your listeners understood, you were talking about like the dangers in relying on leadership, and how then you're also involved with relying on their egos and all these other kinds of things that get in the way. I am not someone that thinks we should be doing that, right? I am someone that thinks that working people need to organize such that you are not beholden to their decisions or egos. You can force what you want. I don't think we should be dependent upon whether they're going to be nice to us once we elect them. No, we have to be powerful enough through our unions, through our other organizing, that they do what we want or else, because that's what it is for our class enemies, right? Elon Musk and Zuckerberg and all those guys. It's not about fucking friendship. It's do what we want or else. APOC, it's do what we want or else. If you don't back Israel, we are backing your opponent tomorrow. We will end your career tomorrow. They don't depend on their trust or kindness. Why should the working class be doing that? We shouldn't. It should be we develop ourselves as an organized enough and powerful enough. You better do what we say in office, or else. I mean, it's a very, you're putting yourself in a loser position to be dependent upon the whims of a ruler. And the owning class does not do that.
Yeah, do not definitely take agency yourself. And one of the best ways to do this, I'll advocate for it every single podcast episode. Be more involved in your local politics. I know a lot of people think that the federal government, these national elections are the most. No, the most important thing that's going to help you individually is being involved in your local area, be involved in your local politics, be involved in your state politics. That is how you
And
really start
organize
making
your
a
people,
difference.
organize your workplace. If you've got a union, join it and support it, all this kind of stuff. And don't believe all these sycophants, all these bootlickers out there saying like, oh, they're not. No, 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 no. Again, you don't have to believe them. You don't even have to believe me. Just look at history. Well, it's the only way working people in this country have ever gotten anything. There is only one answer to that question: organization, unionization, and militant action as such. And I'll go to the rack on that. If anyone in your audience can name one exception to that, I would be impressed, because there really aren't any. 8-hour day, thanks to that. Rights to unionize in the first place, thanks to that. The weekend, overtime pay, all connected to the 8-hour day, all thanks to that. All developed in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And to demonstrate like what's a new right we've earned since then as working people. No, we've only had things taken from us since then. Those of us that used to have pensions don't anymore. Those of us that used to have living wages in those manufacturing jobs don't have those jobs and don't have those wages anymore. And the only ones that do are the ones that are highly unionized and highly organized, like members of the UAW, who just won a giant contract last year, right? So
Yeah,
again, like I just ask people, it's like, why listen to me about that, or your talking heads about that? All you got to do is look at your history. It's the only way we as working people have ever gotten anything in this country. There's literally no historical exception. So,
I very much agree.
you want a better life? We have the playbook, right? But we have to organize, and we have to fight for those things.
Yep. Organize, unionize, protest. make your voices heard, do what you got to do. When I say that, that doesn't mean do anything.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm covering my bases. That doesn't mean do anything.
yeah.
With that said, do you have any final words? Feel free to plug your book again.
Oh yeah, no, just yeah. So human rights praxis, struggle for survival. It's a little nerdy, but for those that want to learn about global geopolitics and the ins and outs of all this kind of stuff, international law, all of it, you'll get more than you bargained for, probably. Um, but more importantly, I'm just happy to be on the show, man. I'm trying to do as much of these conversations as I can. Like I said, we're living in a really challenging time. And so I really
Yeah.
feel like those of us whose job it is to make these things clear for people, and that we don't have political skin in the game. I'm not running for office. I'm not tied to a political party. I'm not, you know what I'm saying? Like, this is just me doing my job for the people, right? I really believe in doing that. So anytime I can join, fam, let me know. I'm happy to come on and answer questions. Happy to answer questions from you. Happy to answer questions from audience members. Whatever I can do to contribute, man, I'm just happy to do it. I'm really, really happy to be here.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming on. Of course, I do think this was a very interesting conversation. I do think it was a very enlightening conversation. We covered quite a few different topics in reference to human rights. I do think we kind of broken down. Hopefully, people understood all the different point of views that were kind of coming out of. I feel like we kind of broke that down pretty well in the midst of this conversation. And ultimately, you guys got to realize that yes, we're going to criticize MAG administration, but ultimately it is for you, the voters, for the people who are listening, trying to create a better future, trying to create a better society. And as I mentioned before, I don't believe in a perfect utopia, but we can constantly improve and create a better society. It's always possible. We've been doing that
Yep.
for a very long time in human history. So it's just another constantly improving, of course.
Yep.
With that said, appreciate everybody who listened to the podcast. If you enjoyed, rate the podcast 5 stars, share with all your friends. Go check out the social links in my link tree, of course. You have a good one. Take care and peace.